Got it.
Hi, welcome to Red, White, and Black, a podcast where we talk about when red states, white people, and Black lives intersect. I'm your host, Pastor Morgan.
And I am your co-host, Luana Nelson Brown. And we are so excited to be here to talk to you today about our podcast and what you can expect moving forward, and how important it is for us to talk about what it's like living Black in a red state with a whole lot of white people. Right? And it's important because a lot of people don't have the opportunity to live the way we do. And so they definitely don't understand what it looks like, what that intersection looks like. But I can tell you from one, when you're living Black in a red state, the disparities that you see for Black people are astronomical. So, for example, in the state that we live in, if you're a Black woman like me, gorgeous, first of all, full of joy, second, and magic, third, but also 6 times more likely to die in childbirth than your white counterparts, right? And when you try to tackle an issue such as that, and we have many, that's just one example, but when you try to tackle an issue such as that and you try to dissent or fight for just and fair treatment, when you that's you.
No, it's not actually, which is why I asked you to do this.
I thought we were starting over. Okay. So I'm super excited to be with you today to talk about this important topic and tell you why we chose to name our podcast this and why it's important that you know what it's like living as Black people in a red state that is predominantly white, which is vastly different than living in a red state where you have sections of higher Black populations, right? So, for example, one of the first things living Black in a red state, these are the states where you find the highest and worst disparities for Black people. So, for example, as a Black woman like myself, while we are full of joy and magic and all of those things, we are also in this state 6 times more likely to die in childbirth than our white counterparts. And what makes it unique as opposed to another state where you have a high Black population is many things. But one of the things that affects me most is when you try to seek justice, when you try to dissent, when you try to protest, the extreme silencing, the criminalization, the surveillance, the removal of social capital is almost unbearable. And that, I think, is unique to living Black with so many white people in a red state.
Right.
So,
oh, go ahead.
Yep. No, I was going to say, so that's my thoughts, but yours may differ a little.
No, like one of the reasons that when we talked about this, but for the people listening and watching watching, when we talked about this, we talked about doing a podcast that talked about these issues, right? And so we didn't talk about at the time naming it Red, White, and Black. We just talked about these issues and that somebody should talk about it. We should do a podcast where we talk about it. When I went to design the logo is when we started talking about the name and trying to narrow it down. And we wanted something that wasn't going to be long, something that was going to be easy to remember, but something that encompassed everything that we were talking about. And when you live in America and everything you hear is about the red, white, and blue, red, white, and blue, red, white, and blue. And then when you were Black and during 2020, all you heard was it's a response to Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. It was an automatic thing for me. It was automatic in my head to make that connection to change blue to Black. And so when you talk about the red, white, and Black, then it's red states, white people and Black lives. And so if you are listening to this, you won't be able to see what I'm saying right now, but it is our logo that is actually up on all of our podcast platforms. And it is the Black logo with the white outline of the United States, and inside it says red, white, and black, the podcast. So this was very intentional in my designing of this because I wanted the design to basically encompass everything that we're going to be talking about this, no matter how long we talk about it. No matter how long this podcast goes on, everything we're going to be talking about is encompassed in this one logo. And in this logo, it's red, white, and black, where red and white are intertwined, basically, where the D, the bottom of the D becomes the top of the H, and the tittle, the comma after red becomes the tittle in the white. Because in states where you live in a red state that does have a predominantly white population, and a very, very low Black population, this is what you find. You find an intertwining of the politics of the state combined with the cultural upbringing or the racial dynamics or the white superiority complex of white people in that state. And so it becomes not about what is good for the state even, regardless of the people who live in it, but it becomes more of a race war of these are Black people want this. So this is the opposite of what we're going to do, because we assume that the opposite of what Black people want is good for white people. So it just becomes this really nasty, incestuous intertwining. And then the white, though it has plenty of room, and there is no reason, and if you look at the logo, you can see there's plenty of room for the white to be there, not encroaching upon, just to be there, and let the Black just be there because they're approximately the same size and lettering. But instead, the white is encroaching on the Black space, even though it doesn't have to, simply because it can. And that is, and so all of these things together is a physical or an artistic analogy for the physical or the reality that Black people in predominantly red states live in every day, with these same little nuances that affect our everyday lives, and in small and giant ways.
Yeah.
So
yep.
There's a lot to encompass, but there's a lot to talk about. So
there's so much to talk about. I really like the, where you highlighted the white taking up so much space, because, that's a reality for us. It's the tiny spaces that we have is always, the white is always encroaching upon our space.
Even though they don't have to.
So it goes beyond.
Brings us to gentrification. Exactly. But that's another topic we're going to talk about.
Exactly. And so it goes beyond, in anti-racism work and racial justice work, we talk a lot about centering.
And it crosses party lines.
Right, exactly. It not only crosses
for us,
party, right?
For us, not for white people, it doesn't.
Right.
But for Black people, it crosses party lines because, not surprisingly, in Iowa there are quite a few Black Republican lawmakers, and we will talk about how their path to the state house is not as clear cut. Nor is it a red carpet welcoming that they receive. In fact, even though so many people of color have run for office in Iowa as Republicans, I believe there is only one that is actually in the House.
I think so. It's my representative, as a matter of fact.
Which we'll talk about that election and how that ran when you are a Black person running as a Republican in a red white state.
Exactly. And how it doesn't look a whole lot different from being a Black person running.
It looks like you're Black. That's what it looks like. It looks like no matter what colors you rave, this color, this is the one that matters. That's what it looks like.
Exactly. And so everywhere, in this state, it's an experience of being Black and living in a state where you have such little numbers, number one, that also equates to such little space, because whiteness always encroaches on your space. And then you've got, Black lives that accommodate and accept that, and then judge you when you dissent. So,
which it's interestingly enough, we are Black. I don't know if you follow them. If you don't and you're listening to this, you should. They have a great social media person or team. I don't know who the heck is doing their social media, but their social media team is on fire. So not only they send out emails, which most of us ignore, right? But if you choose these options, and all of them are optional, they will send you text links to stories, and they will send them to you through Facebook Messenger. And or Instagram. And I actually have subscribed to them sending them to me every way, just in case I miss it. And so it's about us. It's right. We are Black. It is exactly what it says. And right. So it's historical, it's present day, these stories, and they're stories that somebody is scouring every newspaper from around the world and finding stories that are highlighting Black people. And we are getting to hear them from the past, present, and what the future looks like as well. And so it's a really good, but they sent me one today in my messenger, and it was about, and God dang it, which HBCU was that? Was it Southern University? The one where the kids, it's a HBCU, and the kids were protesting for their rights and blah, blah, blah. And the Black administrations called in the National Guard, and two of them ended up being killed after they took over the administration building. They made a movie about it at some point, but I was just reading the story again. And why I brought it up is it reminds me of what you were just talking about, because in the story, the part of the story they said, and Black administrators not wanting to look soft in front of white legislations and legislators called the National Guard in, and in fact murdered two of our next generation trying to seek the approval of white people in their state.
Right.
White legislations and legislators in their state. So that brings it back to basically kind of what you were talking about, that pressure to not act in the best interest of you or your community as a Black person, because to keep that unstable foothold, that little bit of power, you have to step on somebody.
Yep, you gotta step on somebody.
Yeah, gotta step on somebody. It's not gonna be the white folks in a predominantly white state.
Exactly. You're not stepping on
Nope.
it. And that's one of the things.
It's gonna be your fellow Black person that you put your foot on their head and to make your way up the ladder.
And there's typically no consequence for that. There's no consequence for that.
Because what? That's
right. That's what you're supposed to do.
We live in a country that was built on the head of Black people. No, there's no consequences. That's status quo.
Right. That is.
I just did an entire 3-part series, that freaking podcast, an entire 3-part series where again and again and again and again and again and again and again, I had to use references and stories of groundbreaking freaking scientific technology, science and medical technology being built on the heads of Black people with absolutely no credit given. Not only did you do it and would take advantage, but there was no credit given, whether it be Onesimus. Onesimus, the enslaved guy who brought the cure for smallpox to Boston and saved this, and or whether it's Henrietta Lacks, who basically we all owe, whether we have suffered from insomnia or cancer, we all owe our lives to her for treatment. But it's again and again and again. And one of the things I read from this doctor in Harvard who wrote one of the articles was when Black people are faceless when it comes to that. That's why they never I did a TikTok one time and somebody said, name something Black people have invented.
Did you do an hour-long TikTok naming all the things?
If I could have, I could have. Right. If I could have, I could have.
Exactly. See that right there, that attitude right there, that Well, I don't know anything that Black people like. We live amongst that every day, right? We live amongst that every day from
while simultaneously bragging about Buxton and how Iowa integrated schools almost 100 years before the rest of the United States.
exactly.
Dichotomy, that
Mhm.
dichotomy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That duality where two things can be true is something.
Cognitive dissonance
It's cognitive
is the
dissonance.
phrase we're looking for.
Right. It's cognitive dissonance at its finest, you know. Well, Iowa, you know, we were the first to desegregate schools. And yet we have the biggest giant pipeline from school to prison.
Well, that's funny that that's what you said, because when you said that, what I was thinking is when.
Right. That.
When?
Exactly.
When did we desegregate?
As
Because
far
if
as
I
I
walk
know,
through Hoover, and if I walk through North, and if I walk through East, and
right,
if I walk through Roosevelt,
right,
and if I walk through Valley,
right.
these are totally different experiences.
Totally different
I
experiences.
totally different. I went to Hoover and had a hard time finding a white child.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I
And
went in the middle of lunchtime and everybody was there. And I don't know if you've been to Hoover in the middle of
yeah, I've
lunchtime,
been
but when you walk in those main doors, that's
exactly,
where lunch is. So as soon as you walk
exactly.
in there, kids from minutes had a hard time finding a white child.
Yep,
Same
yep,
thing when you go to North.
yep, exactly.
The opposite if you
Yeah.
go to Valley
Complete
or
opposite,
Roosevelt
or Johnston,
or
or
Johnston. And if you step in the East, that's where you find all your Latino kids.
exactly. So I'm not sure
The
when we
majority.
actually desegregated schools or neighborhoods, you know, in this state. And that's another thing that, you know, people tout here, that we desegregated our neighborhoods before anybody else. That's not true at all, you know. So the gaslighting.
I moved to Iowa and I didn't see another white person for 2 weeks.
Right.
I didn't see it. I moved to Iowa, and this is not a lie. My mother-in-law lives in an area that is Black area of town, because there is no desegregation. Trust and believe.
Right.
The desegregation comes from tearing apart Black communities that people were pushed in the first place. Right. So, but that being said, I came here and I didn't see a white person for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I believe
For 2
that.
weeks, for real. I had to re-look up the demographics because I was like, I know they're here because they're 98% of the population, but I don't see them. But that's because, and I went everywhere. I went to work, I went to the store, I went because the area that I live in is Black and brown folks.
Right. And that is where you will find your Black legislators, you know.
Because... And shout out, you know what, on that note, really, shout out, because we do, and I don't know if I'm really gonna shout them out here because it's that thing.
Right.
Talk about some stuff. But that being said, there is a legislator in Iowa, one of the 4 Black legislators that we have in the Capitol, that lives right in his neighborhood. Right. Exactly. Right in the neighborhood he represents. He does not use a fake address. He does not travel there. When he ends his time at the Capitol with all the people who live in West Des Moines and all over the place, he drives his behind right about 1.5 miles up the street, right to the hood, and goes home.
True. That is true. That is absolutely true. So you got to give it to him for that, you know.
Yes.
You got to give it to him for that.
Because everybody knows where he lives, and people got complaints. People don't like him. People this, people that, and everybody knows exactly where he lives, and he still ain't moving.
Exactly. And he won't move.
And he works there. He lives and works in that same neighborhood. 4 blocks up the street is where he goes.
Exactly.
That's his spot. Those are his people.
That's exactly right. So yeah, but it's, you know, even though we have, you know, our pockets, our communities, it still does not compare to the vastness of the state itself, you know. And so,
not by numbers, not by percentages. In these, when we're talking about, you know what? You talked a little bit at the beginning about why this was specific to living in predominantly white red states, because we talked about this, though there are few and far in between, really, there are some states that are red, but they are not overwhelmingly white. We are not talking about Georgia's. or
Right.
Alabama's even
Right.
really.
Right.
We are talking about the Iowas. We are talking
Exactly.
about you know what? I can't even really no, you know what? I'll give it to Ohio. We're talking about the Iowas. We're talking about Ohio. We're talking about South Dakota, Wisconsin, Montana, all
Right.
Oregon, all these streets, all these states that Black people live in. But because the numbers are so small, people literally, and I do not mean this figuratively in any way, shape, or form, literally do not think that Black people live in these
Right.
states. Like
I
they
mean,
do not think that there is
yeah.
a Black person
Right.
that
Exactly.
resides in these states,
Exactly.
let alone hundreds of thousands of Black people. Because
Exactly.
Iowa has what, 4 million people in it?
Yeah.
4 million
Roughly.
people in the state. So even at 4%, 4% of 4 million people is still 400,000 people.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
even at 4%, that's still four. It's not, and that's why it's dangerous to think about things, especially populations, in terms of numbers. Because you think about it in
Right.
terms of numbers, then you forget that numbers are people. So it's
Right.
not a 4% population, it's 400,000 people, families,
Exactly.
mothers, fathers, children, uncles, aunts, cousins, workers, you know,
Right.
400,000 people that these decisions every day and living in this
Right. And that's the
effect.
part, right. That's the part that I think is so important for those who don't live in these states to understand, right? Because it's so easy to just go, Iowa, do Black people live in Iowa? Black people don't live in Iowa. And if you do, you don't matter. You're literally talking about
Because there's
400.
only like two of you,
Right.
basically.
You and your family. That's it, you know. But no, we're talking about 400,000 people, you know,
That's
and
right, right? I'm pretty
I think so. I don't
that's
know.
I'm
We
not
can
great at
fact check
math, but I'm
later.
pretty sure that 1% of a million is 100,000. So
Yes,
I'm
that's
gonna,
correct.
so then
Yeah.
yeah. All
Yeah,
right. Well, hey,
that's right. Yeah.
ah, look at that education.
Right. I do believe that is correct. so
I'm not
yes,
a
we're
smart
talking
man.
right. So, do you if you support all Black people, which is another topic we're going to talk about down the line, what supporting all Black people actually looks like. If you support all Black people, then you can't throw away 400,000 people, that live in a state that you're unfamiliar with. So that's why it's important that we talk about this, we tell these stories, we explain what the dynamics are when you live in this state. And especially since I feel like sometimes we're like the testing ground, the stuff that we experience later, DC experiences, later, California experiences. It's like, does this work on 400,000 Black people? Oh, it does. Let's throw
Let's
that
try it
away.
on a million. Let's try it
Right.
on 2 million. Let's try it on
Exactly.
4 million.
Exactly. And so, we only, and I guess it's safe to say we are in Iowa right now, and people only pay attention to us once every 4 years. And there's a lot of discussion too. And I don't know how we haven't discussed this part ahead of time, but there's a lot of discussion too about not making us first in the nation, right? When caucuses come. But when living here, I'm torn on that because true, our population does not reflect the country. However, that time is the only time that 400,000 of us have a voice in the country. It's the only time.
It's the only time we matter. It really is. It's the only time we matter because if you're not, and you're not, okay, so you have to touch on this because the majority of the people who listen to it are going to pretty much understand the dynamics because, to be honest, the majority of people who listen to it to begin with are going to be probably from Iowa, just simply because, so right. So but if you are not, or you're not from Iowa, you may not know that being first in the state, or if you're not from Iowa, if you're from a predominantly white red state, you know all the things that we're kind of talking about, but you probably don't know this. And if you are not from either, then you don't know this. But when politicians come in this once every 4 years, because we're first in the nation, they spend a lot of money. And because they want our vote, the Black vote, because we kind of lead the trend there, then they spend a lot of money in Black communities. Right. And they give money and they help with things. And it's an influx of money that sometimes lasts us until the next like government race, when somebody will maybe give a little money here or there, but nothing compared to the federal level.
Exactly.
But it'll get us to the next congressional race normally, where they have, especially federal congressional races, have a little more funding to be able to use and to give. So it's a big source of funding when it comes to that. So that source of funding is fundamental. It's necessary for a lot of, especially the grassroots organizations, the mutual aids, the churches, which campaigning in Black areas, we're going to talk about that too. But basically, there's so many things that we can't even cover. But because last time we really just wanted to get an episode out there to really talk about these elections, and it was a perfect time to kind of introduce what was going on with that. We wanted to go ahead and get that together. And so we threw that episode out there, but we wanted to come back and kind of really do an in-depth introduction to what we're going to be talking about, to why this conversation is needed, to what this actually is, so that you can get a handle on what it's going to be, what we're going to talk about, and the lack of punches we're going to pull. And I think that is probably the biggest one, because something's wrong with my head, so I don't care. And Luana is pretty outspoken, so you're not gonna see the same tiptoeing around different conversations and topics that you see a lot of different spaces, because we don't have time to tiptoe. We've been doing this shit since doing it was doing it, to be very honest. But if we really if we really want to be diplomatic about it, which I am never in favor of, then let's go with at least the Civil Rights Act. So we go with at least the Civil Rights Act. We're still talking about 70 some years that we've been doing this. And we've been doing this in red states, and we've been doing this in blue states, and we've been doing this in white states, and we've been doing, and I'm tired of sounding like a Dr. Seuss character. So it's time for us to to talk about this, get this stuff on the table, so we can come up with the plan, come up with the solution. We're not just talking about it, we're talking about it so that we can start to think about it, so that we can start to move forward in this, so that we're not handing the same BS off to our kids, so that they stand and marching in the streets just like their fathers and their fathers and their grandfathers and great grandfathers before them. That's bullshit. It's time for it to stop. And so it's time for us to talk about it so that we can
Yeah. And I think that's, the most important thing for me personally, at least, is to actually get it out there and talk about it in a transparent, honest way that is not censored,
and not bipartisan. This isn't about red, Black people. This isn't about red people or blue people. This is about Black folk. That's what this is about. And regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, this is about you.
This is about you, no matter where you fall on that spectrum. And so it's time. And I'm excited and ready to have the conversations. And I know you're excited and ready to have the conversations.
I think it's going to be good.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. And hopefully those of you out there listening and watching, you're excited and you're ready to have the conversations. There will be some episodes where we are interactive as well. And so you'll have a chance, to speak.
And we're missing a host. So we're missing a host. We're missing a whole Jalen, because it's the weekend before, Thanksgiving.
Or Fakesgiving.
Fakesgiving. It's the weekend before Fakesgiving, so he is out of town. So, but we wanted to get this episode out because after this weekend, when we come back with our next episode next week, we're going to hit the ground running, and we're not going to stop. So we wanted to take the time. So you will probably see future videos where we will reference. If you're confused about what everything's going on, go back and check out our intro video, because we are going to hit the ground running, and we're going to talk about some stuff. And we're going to have this guy.
We're going to have this
this guy.
This guy that we're missing. All right. So we'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to see you next time on Red, White, and Black.
Let's talk about it later.